This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's podcast from. And on today's podcast is a guest that has not joined the podcast before, but someone who I'm pretty sure that many of our podcast followers will have come across in the events industry. And we're going to be talking today about Women in Exhibitions, specifically the UK chapter of Women in Exhibitions, and my guest's thoughts and 5 tips, if you can call it that, on career pathways and sort of how to navigate maybe the topsy-turvy world of events in that particular situation. I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to the Event Industry News podcast, Rachel Swann. Rachel is the COO of the Energy Division at DMG Events and also a board member of Women in Exhibitions at the UK chapter. Rachel, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Thank you for having me, James. I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks for taking the time out. I know we were just talking off air, all sorts of different commitments that we're having to juggle at the moment, and we've juggled this around a little bit to fit it in with our schedules. So yeah, thanks very much. We really do appreciate you sort of taking the time out to have a chat about this subject. And I suppose the best place to start may be just a bit of a professional bio, Rachel. It's your first time on the podcast, so for anybody who's listening to the podcast today who hasn't come across you in the events industry before, give us a bit of context as to who you are and what you do.
Thank you, James. As you said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at DMG Events, and I've been at DMG for the last 8 years. My current role involves working with the president and the executive team to commercially drive the business forward, and I've got direct responsibility for the finance and HR teams. We have offices and events globally, which means I travel frequently and work across different time zones. I'm the Vice Chair of the Association of Event Organisers, the AEO, and as you mentioned, I'm also on the board of Women in Exhibitions. And for those of you that haven't heard of Women in Exhibitions, it supports women working across the events and exhibitions and helps them develop in their roles. It provides training, mentoring, networking, and the opportunity to be part of a trusted community. I'm also a mother to a 3-year-old boy, so as you can imagine, this involves a lot of juggling. There's still only, women only make up 30% of leadership positions in the UK. And I'm really passionate to ensure that women have the same opportunities as men to progress their careers. You can see that we've still got a long way to get to equality in the boardroom, and not everybody wants to get there. Be here and be part of that 30% and be here today with you in my role as CEO at DMG Events.
Fabulous. And something that you said there, which I think is an important consideration, is that not everybody wants to maybe get to those senior positions, but what's important is that the opportunity is there to do so. And would it be fair to say that it's the opportunity that maybe in the past has not been as prevalent for women as it has been for men in terms of pathways and obvious steps forward in order to achieve those positions?
Yes, that's true. And we really believe at Women in Exhibitions, we can help support in that journey.
And what tell us specifically about the UK chapter, because Women in Exhibitions is very much a global entity. If you go onto the Women in Exhibitions website, and I would urge anybody that's listening to this today, I always say, do your follow-up. If you listen to and you hear anything on here and you think, oh, that's piqued my interest, do go on to the websites and do your search for, because I think back in June, there was the Women in Exhibitions Summit in Maastricht in the Netherlands. So we're not just talking about something that's in the UK. This is a global entity as an organisation of which the UK chapter was set up. Is it fairly recently, last few years?
Just pre-COVID. And that was a great opportunity to set it up because people obviously had a bit more time on their hands when we weren't running events.
Of course.
But yeah, we're committed to give everybody opportunities. We provide training predominantly online, but we have social networking events and to help people network with their peers. And we also provide a great mentoring scheme, which is helping people come up through the business. And we're matching people with people across different events companies where we believe that they can help them and guide them within their careers.
And another point of reference there for the Women in Exhibitions UK website is that all of those mentors, or certainly a significant proportion of them, are actually listed on the website. So anybody who wants to sort of find out more about that, you only have to click on the website, a couple of times, and you'll be on the mentor page, and you can see, a fairly significant list of people who work in the events industry, a lot of faces and names that I recognize. But again, another point of reference to make sure that after you've listened to this today, to follow up and have a look at the UK website. I think what we're going to move on to today, Rachel, is this idea that you've evolved in that, there are sliding doors moments. Everybody who listens to this and who works in this industry will attest that they've all had their own sort of sliding doors moments, those points in their life where they've had to make a decision that way or that way, yes or no, left or right, depending on what's in front of them at the moment. And you've sort of, I suppose, in some respects, boiled that down to 5 points that people can maybe relate to or look at and maybe give some guidance to. Let's work through those, because it's I'm sure it's going to sort of take us on a bit of a journey as we discuss those. And number one is just the obvious choice, choosing the right career path. Tell us about point number 1, and let's go from there.
I really believe that you'll work hard at things you enjoy. It's interesting, a recent poll conducted by Gallup in 2021 uncovered that out of the world's 1 billion full-time workers, only 15% of people are engaged at work. And that means an astronomical 85% of people are unhappy in their jobs, which is quite sad, really. After I qualified as an accountant in an accountancy firm and was looking for my first job in the commercial world, I had to decide what industry I wanted to work in. And I was lucky that whilst I'd worked in audit, I had the benefit of working for many different clients, and I knew I'd prefer a culture of a company that was people focused. And I really wanted to find a role that excited me. And that was my first sliding doors moment. Like most people, I fell into the world of exhibitions, and 20 years later, I'm still here. And I strongly believe that you work harder at things you enjoy. So it's essential to make a list of things that are important to you and think about this when you're looking for the right company and the right role. Enjoying your role in the company that you work for is a great start to tackling some of the other barriers that you might have to navigate during your career. And sometimes you have to leave your company to progress, but often you can just stay there and work your way up the ladder. But I also feel that don't rule out sideways move during your career, because this sometimes can be beneficial for you as well.
Do you think sometimes that sideways movement within companies can be sometimes as not restrictive, but not as accessible as upwards movement? Because I remember, years ago when I worked in a publishing company, I always had an interest in journalism and writing and putting words together. And I worked at this publishing company in a sales role, in advertising sales, and I always secretly harbored this sort of desire maybe to move across and sideways into the sort of the actual editorial side of things, but there just wasn't that movement available in that organization. It was never the twain shall meet. You work in the sales department, and that's your team over there, and you're not quite, and so you couldn't move. So I'm just curious to know whether or not sometimes those sideways steps in organizations maybe are under considered by business leaders, and there should be maybe some more obvious steps for people to move into other roles that may be parallel to what they're doing and not necessarily upwards, to maybe expand their own I suppose their own education.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, James. And I think it could be beneficial, especially in the events sector, where you're looking at maybe in the future, you've got your heart set on an event director role, but you're in one discipline at the moment, whether that being sales or marketing or content, and you could really benefit from getting exposure to some different roles across the business. But I think it all depends on your employer, doesn't it, and how supportive of you they are.
Yeah, because I suppose when I think of event directors that I've met and come across and worked with over the last 13, 14 years, all of them have a very, very knowledgeable and detailed understanding of all of the various different verticals that make up a successful event. and they're able to communicate and actually guide and manage and direct those individual elements very, very clearly. So it's obvious that when you get to sort of director and leadership level, that you do need to have that understanding of all the different roles, don't you? So I just think maybe it's sometimes that something that we overlook in business as a whole sometimes is giving people the opportunity to maybe just do even placement, in other positions, just to get an understanding of what another department does on their way up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Moving on to point number 2, and I've noted down here is along the lines of bouncing back. And I'm curious. I've got the 5 points here, but no explanation as to what they are. So I'm exactly as the listeners are today. I've got the 5 individual points, but I'm waiting to hear what Rachel has to say about each one as much as the people listening today are. So number 2, bouncing back.
I think bouncing back is really important. I really believe you can't live with the fear of making mistakes. And I looked up some research on this point. And according to research from the Nairobi Business University, they've found out that 1 out of 2 people think they could perform better at work if they were not worrying about making mistakes. And you can't live with the fear of making mistakes, because this will hamper you in your career and lead to the inability to make decisions. And we all know, without decision making, an organisation just gets paralysed. I've made mistakes in my career, and these were followed by more sliding doors moments. But I didn't let these mistakes define my career. I held my hands up and I apologised and moved on, and just made sure I didn't make the same mistakes again. I think as a manager, you need to make sure that your team isn't worried about making mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes, because everyone's human. But it's really important, you need to admit them and learn from them and not repeat them, and put in place plans to make sure that they don't happen again if the situation, arose again.
And I guess, risk often drives innovation, doesn't it? If we're prepared to take risks, that means that, if we want to do something different or innovate or come up with a new idea for something or a new way of doing something, particularly in an event, that does mean that there is always an element of risk attached to it. Changing what you've done, regularly in past events, to do something totally different, comes with it a certain level of trepidation. But, having the confidence to be able to do it, knowing that you might not necessarily fail, but make a mistake, and you may have to just come back from it and not let it sort of drag you down, is so critical to how we run events.
Yeah, definitely. And you need to feel supported in doing so, don't you?
Yeah. If you go to somebody with an idea, again, at any level, and this I suppose comes back and is very apropos the whole discussion, given that, in terms of the exhibition sector, I think I read in some notes prior to today's recording that 80% of entry level positions are filled by women. So there are obviously a lot of women at entry level positions where maybe some of those ideas and the innovation and the the promoting them to take risk and be innovative maybe is a way of actually improving those pathways that we spoke about at the very beginning.
Yeah, definitely.
Playing to strengths is point number 3. Where do we go through with this one?
I think it's important to know what you're good at. And I always remember a conversation that I had with a group CFO years ago at a drinks reception. And he said to me, "Do you want to be CFO one day?" And I said, "I'm not sure. I'm not that passionate about financial accounting." And to which he replied, "Well, when you get the CFO role, you can hire somebody that does your job for you." And I think Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In makes a really good point, that men would apply for positions when they only meet 60% of the criteria, while women only apply if they meet 100% of the requirements. And this holds women back. And so at this point, I'm going to say, make sure you jump through those sliding doors and get on the train. And you don't want to miss an opportunity for promotion while you're waiting to get 100% of the required skills. You really need to understand your strengths and play to them. Take opportunities when they arise and put your hand up to take on extra responsibility. And even if you don't feel that you have the experience, you'll grow into the role. You need to be honest with yourself as to where your weaknesses are and where you have knowledge gaps, and then make sure that you have a supportive team around you to support you in those weaker areas.
Do you think, are you an advocate of people applying and going for jobs that they know actually that they probably won't get because they're not quite there yet, because of the skill set and the experience that it gives them?
I think it depends. I think you should be honest, actually, in the interviews, and I think that bodes well if you go into a job and say, I'm really strong in these areas, but I'm not so strong in this areas, but I can learn, or I'm going to need a bit more support in that area. And I think that's the way to play it. I think you don't want to sort of over promise, do you, and not have be able to back that up. So I think it's better to be honest from the outset, and employers are quite open and appreciate that, don't they? That's what I found.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some respects, that ties in a little bit with what we were saying earlier about these sort of sideways movement as well. Don't be afraid of sideways movement. That if you go into an interview let's say you're going for a promotion in an organization that you're already working for, and you talk about your strengths and your weaknesses, or where you would like to gain more experience, that's another way of telling an employer and an organization that you need to have more opportunities for us to develop our understanding of these other areas within the organization. If they're your weaknesses at the moment, then turn that into a strength or an opportunity by saying to your employer, I'd like to get some experience in these areas in order so when I come back for this interview again in a year's time, it's no longer a weakness of mine. I can say, actually, it's a strength because I did 6 months with that department.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to bring up with your manager in your sort of regular one-to-ones or annual appraisals, so that you can say at that point, if you've got a goal in the next couple of years, you can work towards it and say, can I have extra training in this area? Could you send me on a course on something else? So don't be afraid to say if you think you need some extra help. I think it's good to be honest, isn't it? And then people can help you.
Absolutely. Let's move on to point number 4. The grass is not necessarily greener, or the grass is greener.
Not always. I think be honest with yourself. Why are you unhappy? And I was trying to find a piece of research for this, and I found an interesting report by the Workforce Institute that said 15% of employees have returned to a former employer, and 40% would consider applying for a position at a company they've previously worked for. So I think that proves the grass isn't always greener. And I was recently in Dubai, and I met up with somebody who used to work for me, and they'd left my team to go and work for a job outside of our industry and for more money. And at the time, I tried to persuade them to stay, and said the grass isn't always greener. And when I saw them, they asked me for their old job back and said I was right, and they regretted leaving. So you have to be careful. I think you have to be honest with yourself and really question why you're unhappy, and ask yourself the following questions. Is a new job going to be any different? Do I like my current boss? Do I like my current job? Or is it all about money? And maybe you could approach your current employer about that. Just your boss and your company align to your values. And is there a way to make it work? And can you change maybe the way you're working to make it different? I think another memorable key sliding doors moment for me was when I was experiencing a difficult working relationship with a former boss. And it was really making me unhappy. And I had to decide, should I make it work or leave? And I did the former, and I managed to adapt my behaviour to really ensure that I was getting the best out of the relationship and managing it in the right way.
And point number 2, bouncing back, and point number 4, the grass is greener, really now tie in with each other, because again, it goes back to the sliding doors and really sort of taking the time to make the right decision, because number 2 is bouncing back. So we talked about risk and being prepared to be innovative and take risk and be prepared to bounce back if you maybe don't succeed at that. But similarly, the grass is not always greener on the other side. So whilst we want to encourage people, don't we, to take risk and be innovative and take that leap, knowing that, and have the confidence to bounce back if you need to, that sometimes that leap is not always going to necessarily yield something that's better than what you've already got. So they do tie in with these points all do tie in with each other. And certainly I can testify to, I've been in that situation before, where I've made a decision based on money to go somewhere else that was a completely within weeks. I think, if I'm being brutally honest, I think within about a week I knew that I'd made a terrible decision. And you can usually tell or spot the bad decisions fairly quickly when you've made that decision, whether it be for money or thinking it's a better opportunity somewhere else. I do tend to think, from my own experience, that people will know about them fairly quickly, won't they?
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and moving on. Well, I mean, we're 20 minutes into today, and we're getting to point 5, which gives us some time to have a little bit of a chat about all of these and a bit of overview. So we're at point number 5 now, which is knowing when to leave.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult one, and I think you need to base this on an informed decision. And this ties back to the point you said before. You really need to weigh up all the pros and cons. And once you've done that, then you can have the confidence to walk away. You need to think about, are you having more bad days than good? Is it making you ill? And or are you just having tunnel vision and not really seeing the positives? And sometimes no one's to blame. It's just not the right fit, a bit like a relationship sometimes.
Yeah.
But you have to make the decisions for yourself, and if needs be, have the confidence to walk away. And for me, this is the ultimate sliding doors moment, and you need to ensure that you're making the right decision for you.
Yeah, and having the right fit, as you put it, is so important, because people forget sometimes, and certainly people external to the events industry don't understand just how diverse it is within the industry in terms of how many different types of event, different clients that we work for. And having the same job title with three different event companies could mean three completely and utterly different jobs for different audiences, with a different relationship and working practices between those three organizations. And that differs greatly from other industries where the same job title would literally be that job regardless of where you go. And having that understanding, and I suppose that this is where it comes back to people who are new coming into the industry, isn't it? Is giving them the understanding and the education that actually, just because they've come into the industry and this is their first job and they're doing this, that the same job for another company or another organization could be something completely different.
Yeah, I agree. And I think cultures can be quite different across all the different event organisers as well, because the companies are all different sizes. So I think not only might have the job title might be the same, but you're doing something different. The culture can be completely different as well. And I think you need to find a boss that is really supportive and champions you in your career as well, because I know during my 20 years in events, that's made a huge difference to me, having a boss that that I get on well with, I've got a good relationship with, and I enjoy working with every day. That makes a huge difference.
Is the balance being redressed, do you think? You mentioned that the UK chapter of Women in Exhibitions, it came about just before the pandemic, so 2019. So what we were 4 years into that in the UK, but much longer than that as a global entity. Do you think the balance is being redressed? Have you seen progress in the time you've been involved on the board and with Women in Exhibitions in the UK?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we get positive feedback from all of our members. And I've also seen that in person, being on the board of the AEO, which I've been involved with them for many years now. And, a few years ago, I think we had one woman on the board, and now it's about half of the board is made up of women. So definitely making progress, but we've still got a long way to go. And I think all of these initiatives that we're putting in place are definitely going to pay dividends, and we're going to see more women being involved, hopefully having more support and making their way up to leadership positions in the future.
And is there any particular sector of the events industry, because the AEO will represent organizers from quite a broad spectrum of events? Is there any sort of particular vertical where we're seeing more progress or less progress? Is it necessarily exhibitions? Is it live music? Is it conferences? Is it consumer events, B2B events? Are there any sort of statistic as such to show where there is more progress or less progress, or do we generally talk about the overall industry?
We're talking about the overall industry. I think one of the benefits of Women in Exhibitions is it goes across it covers all of the elements of companies that are organising exhibitions and events, rather than just organisers. We've got members that are suppliers and venues as well, so it's very inclusive, which is nice. But I think everybody, it's more on people's radar now, isn't it, to try and be inclusive of everybody. And we're definitely seeing progress.
Yeah, and it's important, I suppose, to stress the point that when we talk about women in exhibitions, that I think it would be very easy for some people to instantly think, oh, the exhibition companies, the companies who own these exhibitions and organize them. If you think about everything that goes into putting on an exhibition, we're talking about all of the different contractors, suppliers, that entire supply chain, as well as the people who own it and organize it. Every company and business involved in putting on exhibition in any of the obvious venues that you may think of, this is applicable. What we're talking about today is applicable.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, everybody's welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that the UK chapter has been around since 2019, I'm just wondering what the sort of the interaction is like with other chapters in Europe and internationally, and a comparison to some of the progress that has been felt in other chapters. Are you aware of that at all? Have you had the opportunity to talk to international counterparts and see what the progress is like in other countries?
Yes, as you mentioned, they recently had the Global International Summit in Maastricht, which I was unfortunately unable to go to as I was on site in Canada. But that brought everybody together, which was great. And I think there's more planned for the future of having the international get-togethers. But in the UK, we're one of the chapters that's the furthest ahead and the most developed, which is great. And we're able then, with the membership that we've got so far and the new members that are coming on board, we're able to invest that money back into our members and provide more training, more network opportunities, and obviously, as we discussed earlier, mentoring sessions for people who are interested in that, which I think is brilliant.
We've been talking today on the podcast to Rachel Swann. Rachel is the COO at DMG Event and a board member of Women in Exhibitions in the UK chapter, and also on the board at the AEO, talking to her about these 5 points when it comes to I suppose career pathways, the sliding door moments, the choices that we've faced. Let's recap very quickly, Rachel, on points 1 to 5, just before we wrap up, and maybe give people a few bits of contact information before we finish today's episode. Point 1 was choosing your career carefully. Point 2, bouncing back. Point 3 was play to your strengths. 4, is the grass greener on the other side? And number 5, knowing when to leave. And as you'll have heard when we've been progressing through today's podcast, a lot of those points do interlink with each other, which I suppose brings me nicely to the question that I'm sure will be on the lips of many people who are listening today, Rachel, is how can they get in touch with you about this if people want to, take a little bit of inspiration from what they've heard today and maybe contact you or find out a bit more about women in event tech? How and where do they need to go to do that?
Yeah, of course. You can look me up on LinkedIn, or I'm many of these events, so you'll probably come across me. My details, anyone's welcome to reach out to me. Please contact me on LinkedIn is probably the best one.
Absolutely. And the website, which we've referenced a couple of times, I believe is womeninexhibitions.co.uk is the UK chapter website. Womeninexhibitions.co.uk. Really well put together website, really easy to navigate. Some of the stuff that we mentioned today about the you can see the board members on there really easily. You can see the mentors that Rachel mentioned earlier on in today's podcast. So do have a little look around there and find out what those guys are up to. Which brings us, I suppose, neatly and nicely to the end of today's episode. My thanks to my guest again, Rachel Swann. And before we wrap up today, just a reminder to head over to eventindustrynews.com if you're listening to today's podcast in your earbuds whilst you're out and about on your podcast platform. Head over to eventindustrynews.com, check out the latest news, features, special supplements, and also, of course, the A to Z supplier directory that's on the Event Industry News website. If you are working within the industry and you're looking for a supplier, a contractor, a service of any description, the chances are that you will find it within that A to Z supplier directory. If you're already listening to this via the Event Industry News website today, thanks for tuning in. And please do head over to wherever you get your podcast from on your mobile device, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc. And make sure that you are subscribed to the Event Industry News podcast so that you get all of the episodes as they drop each week. My thanks once again to Rachel. It's been great to meet you. Thanks for taking a bit of time out on what is no doubt a busy Monday and start to the week to have a little chat with us today, Rachel. And to everybody listening to the podcast, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next edition. Goodbye, everybody.